Hi, everyone. I'm very grateful for everyone coming here today. This is a joint event with the Brazil Institute. I'm Kerry Brown. I'm the director of the LCI Institute at King's College. The policy paper that we have promoted in the last year, the policy paper series, this is a contribution to that series and an important issue of China's relations with Brazil. What I would like to do is now invite my colleague, Vinicius, to come onto the screen and maybe introduce himself and also the Brazil Institute. Vinicius, thank you.
Thank you very much, Kerry, for this introduction, and thank you again for the cooperation and collaboration with the publication of this policy paper. My name is Vinicius Mariano de Carvalho. I am Deputy Director of King's Brazil Institute and Vice Dean International for the Faculty of Social Science and Public Policy here at King's College London. We are, yesterday we started our Brazil Week 2022, is a series of events that we host every year, showcasing what we are doing within Brazil Institute related to cooperation inside King's College London, but also with external partners. This policy paper was a great opportunity to exactly demonstrate how we can do this collaboration. First, establishing this good partnership with our brother institute, the LCI Institute, and also with the external partner. In this case, the CEBRI, the Brazilian Center for International Relations. That's the first event that we are doing together, the first activity that we are doing together as partners. And I'm sure that will be a continuation or just the beginning of a long cooperation and partnership here. I probably should say a few words about what is the main goal of this policy paper, Kerry, perhaps just to contextualize if you think that's a good idea. So, when we start to think about this policy paper with Tatiana Rosito, you soon will meet her. We discussed a lot about how the relationship between China and Brazil, it is a relationship that involves a very interesting dynamic, one dynamic of cooperation in one side, and sometimes dynamics of competition as well. So this relationship is full of complementarities and asymmetries. And we discussing that, we saw that Brazil and China relations, they perhaps must be built on very dedicated negotiations with in patience and in long-term strategy. And then that's probably the key elements that we are trying to address in this policy paper. And we are focusing specifically and more detailed in the aspect of trade, what is one expertise of Tatiana. And we are looking at the trade as a sort of successful complementary agenda between the two countries. China is the largest trade partner for Brazil, and also the destination of over 30% of Brazilian exports. That makes China a particular important country to Brazil. Of course, we also look at some challenge that this relationship brings together. No? One of them, and I think the most serious ones, is the need for a diversification on this trade, especially considering that most of what Brazil exports to China comes from agribusiness. And also another challenge, especially for Brazil, is the increasing of the share of value-added products in export. And basically what we are in some way suggestion is that Brazil perhaps must reimagine its path to development, not emulating what China does, but in a critical dialogue with this country and learning with the experience of China. There is one aspect that we taught also quite a lot in the paper. It's about a long-term and strategic relation or trade relation that Brazil should establish with China. And one key sentence that appears, and that is quite key because it reveals a lot about self-perception of Brazil and how Brazil perceives China as well. It's that many Brazilians, especially in the business world, tend to say that, well, China knows what it wants from Brazil, but Brazil doesn't know what it wants from China. Or in other words, China has a strategy towards Brazil, but not vice versa. Well, I think we can discuss that if this is really true or not, but or reflecting a reality or not. But what's important here is that what our paper is trying to do is looking what we have today in this relation between Brazil and China. How can we more consolidate a strategy for this trade relationship and the relationship between these two countries? I will stop here, and I think probably Tatiana can add more at this point.
Great, thank you very much. Well, look, if I could now ask Tatiana Rosito to introduce herself and also then make her statements about her kind of key interest and key argument in the paper. Tatiana.
Am I on? Yes. Okay. So I'm Tatiana Rosito, Senior Fellow at SEBRI, the Brazilian Center for International Relations. It's a great pleasure, Professor Kerry, Professor Vinicius, my co-author, to be here today with you. It's very, I think, it's a topic of my great interest and of, I think, interest of many Brazilian, and I'm glad to see many other people's interest. I think it's telling and timely that, you know, we have that the Brazil Week has among its events the launching of a China Institute paper on trade and relations between Brazil and China as a motivation to discuss Brazil's, or let's say part of Brazil's development challenge. So it's really my pleasure and honor to be here with you today. I will proceed with sort of unpacking, right? Thank you, Vinicius, for starting and setting, you know, the big picture about our paper. I think first I would like to say that Brazil-China trade relations are probably, we must say, they are hugely successful when you look to the numbers. And just as it happened before in the global financial crisis and, you know, before the commodity boom and along through the global financial crisis, we have seen that during the pandemic, the trade has actually increased also even more. In Brazil, we have successful records. We reached 135 billion of trade flows last year. Also, China, you know, has been in the last 2 decades, I would say, also helping very much Brazil to ease the external constraint with all this, the surpluses. There is also sizable, we are not talking so much about it today. We also have sizable and important investments of Chinese firms in Brazil. But like Vinicius alluded to, when we scratch the surface, and that's what we try to do in the paper, we see this complementarities and asymmetries. Some of the, you know, asymmetries are very evident, especially in the concentration of Brazilian exports in raw materials and imports in industrial goods, right? A very traditional pattern. As a trained economist, I'll be quick to say that this is not a problem per se. It could, you know, happen. We have, you know, endowments that could be very actually prone to that. And the agriculture, especially, you know, the agricultural or the vibrant agricultural trade also with China is something that, and Asia at large is something that should be hailed. But, you know, we have this concentration along the last, and you can say this is very constant feature that almost between 70 and 80% of Brazil trade with China in the last 10 years have been, you can are accounted for the exports of soybeans, iron ore, and crude oil, right? With minor changes but also a steady, increase in soybean exports in the last few years, except for, last year we had actually a slight decline in terms of volume of many exports, because of the price of commodities were very high, we still had an increase of exports of almost 30%. And one fact is that also another asymmetry. So China is the largest importer, right, of those goods in the world market. So this adds a very particular importance. It can also lead to dependence and also unexpected shocks of various nature, supply shocks, but also we could think of, risks that stem from this concentration in terms of, technological development, pandemics, and many other facts. Another asymmetry is the fact that Brazil and China actually, they used to have 20 years ago, the GDP of Brazil and China was fairly the same, but today China's GDP is about 10 times that of Brazil. Also in terms of, per capita income, you're similar, but probably China surpassed a little bit. So China is this asymmetry, very, growingly sophisticated market on the way to be an innovative, or at least this is the plan, to be an innovative driven economy, an economy that has been shaped the world in the last 2 decades at least, and it will probably, even though this is still to happen in different forms and challenges we have plenty of challenges, but it will shape also the next decades. And also, most importantly, it is the leader in many of the technologies that will shape this world, right? Being it renewable energy, electric vehicles, the digital world, digital industries, artificial intelligence, and so on and so forth. So Brazil, meanwhile, has benefited also, especially a lot from the globalization and the trade with China, as I mentioned before, has not really been one of the true winners, right? Actually, Brazil's recent history and growth is not that appealing. It's we have also in terms of our per capita income, not only because the pandemic, it's less than, it's more or less what it was a decade or so before. So in various ways, like to continue our unpacking, deciphering, I would say, Brazil-China trade is also a way to concentrate and to concentrate on Brazil's main bottlenecks and explore how this world will offer opportunities and explore new avenues for Brazilian development. And this is so because China magnifies these trends, but also because of the solid framework, also Vinicius alluded to, we have built with China in the last 30 years a solid diplomatic and political framework. And not only that, we are also, have some other convergent or common interest in terms of, the multilateral affairs. For example, we also cooperate in the BRICS, right? And many other fora, of course. So to better benefit from let's say these opportunities, we need to reimagine Brazil's development, and we need to go for a strategy. We are not talking only about a strategy for China, but this strategy for China should also sort of stem from a strategy for the country. And I would say that it's very clear that in the last few years that we have a lot of room to benefit, especially in sustainability linked and the energy transition, sustainability-linked products, like adding value. We can discuss this later. I mean, the 3 ways that we have started to explore, whereby Brazil could try to overcome these bottlenecks. And actually, one in the also, as Vinicius mentioned, one sort of I would say a sort of anxieties that Brazil has as one of its main policy objectives, a declared one in its instruments with China, the diversification of its exports and adding value into that. And as we see this, the constant concentration, actually the increase of this concentration in a few products and risks, we think how to change this picture, right? And the only way to change this is actually to put in place the right incentives. And that's where also we suggest, and we think that one necessary way is to have more long-term agreements, trade agreements, regulatory agreements with China. Of course, Brazil today negotiates agreements with its Mercosur partners, with the trade union. But I think there is ample room for more long-term strategic negotiations, especially in the agriculture field. Because we have increased risks from trade concentration and the many uncertainties today in the world, we should try to lock in, let's say, build trust and lock in some of these benefits, and try to avoid risks that also stem from new policies, including an increased, it seems, concern of China with food security, of course, resiliency within this broader context of the strategic rivalry with the United States, and also the pandemic. I think I'll stay here, and we can probably continue during our Q&A.
Great, thank you very much. That's really appreciated. So really to sort of kick the discussion off, I mean, I think that just the statement that Vinicius made about Brazil not maybe knowing what it wants from China, I think this is a common problem. And what you said, Tatiana, about this sort of asymmetry where now China is economically so much bigger than Brazil. When you look at the politics, the political relationship, you referred earlier to the Economist article that came out last week. I mean, do you see any kind of changes that are on the way in terms of like a president changing? I mean, I believe the current president is maybe a little more kind of questioning of the relationship with China, but potentially, other candidates might be a bit more embracing. How does that impact politics on the domestic politics of Brazil, on the relationship with China?
So shall I take that one, if Tatiana thinks it's a good idea?
Yes,
well,
sure.
That's a very important element indeed that Kerry brought as a question here, and he mentioned this article that came in The Economist 3 days ago, exactly talking about the president's positions and comments about China recently. One thing is important to make a distinction here. The trade relations between Brazil and China are solid and consolidated enough to continue this path of, I would say, development or even growth. I don't think the political element plays an important role at this moment, in particular, in the trade relations between the two countries. Of course, that declarations of the president, of his close members of government against China, they diplomatically don't help the relationship between the two countries. But still, countries have strong relationship in terms of diplomatic traditions. Brazil is a long diplomatic partner of China. We have the BRICS as an important institution or environment for multilateral negotiations, both in economic terms, but also in diplomatic terms. Brazil, it's committed to BRICS strongly, and that will not change or didn't change during the current presidency. And I don't think that this would affect directly the trade relation between the two countries, but of course, they are not healthy in diplomatic terms between the countries as well. And let's see what the elections in October will reveal as change or not in terms of the conduction of the internal politics in Brazil, and how much that can impact in long term for Brazil and China relation. No? But again, just considering the trade aspect, I think that is strong enough to say that hasn't been a change in this path, as Tatiana said, even increased in last year despite the pandemic as well.
Yeah, I mean, Tatiana, if I could sort of slightly change the question. I mean, most places in Europe and America worry that increased investment and trade with China leads to political pressures, that, for instance, China expects certain things in return. So I mean, that's the accusation. I mean, I don't know if that's particularly, you know, I mean, there's no consensus on it, but that's the kind of claim that China has a political price for economic engagement. Is that what you see in Brazil, or do you think that these two things are kind of decoupled, that you can have these strong investment and economic links, but no political pressure is being put on Brazil from China?
Carrie, thanks for the question. I think it's a very important one. I think as in other places, we do have also concerns in the Brazilian, in different sectors of the Brazilian economy. First, we had the very strong concerns from the industry, right? With competition from China, and they have seen the results, especially they have lost a lot of market in Latin America, right? It's not, China's also, I wouldn't say China is the culprit of it, but, it really magnifies, our challenges to be competitive, and then it's really right on our borders. So this is one thing. And then when the major investments started, I think it's fair to say that Chinese investments in Brazil, they also constitute a very successful story. And again, if we look at the facts, right? So China, I mean, in terms of flows, or in the last 10 years, is probably, it's the largest investor, with over about 66 billion of investments. Most of these going first, as to resource intensive sectors. From start, oil has been very large, but also the power sector. And I think if we look to the facts, and those investments, actually, they were very welcome. I think not only for, by the government, at the time when it started in 2010, but actually those sectors, Brazil is very open actually to foreign investment, right? Say it's Brazil, actually the first investments of China in Brazil were actually, and most of it, over 80%, is through mergers and acquisitions. So usually they're also acquiring from other foreign investors, as was the case of some of the, in the power sector. Later, no, because they're also, so these investments in infrastructure are actually very, very welcome. I think the concerns are legitimate, and they should be. Also, if you think that, Chinese investors today in the power sector, Chinese investments are huge and very important, both in transmission and generation. But they have played, as we know, they have played by the rules. And we do have, a regulatory agents, a regulatory environment and regulatory agency, I guess, for us up to now. I mean, this has been a way to deal with that. And we cannot, we don't know for the future. But if you, for example, let me talk, it's true, most of the investments are from state-owned companies linked to SASAC, right? So SOEs, but I think one of the main issues that we have, including in international media, about huge investments of Chinese in Brazil in agriculture, this is simply not there, in terms of numbers. In the last statistics we have is that Chinese investments in Brazilian agriculture will be about 3% of this 66 billion. It doesn't mean that, so I mean, the concerns, especially in terms of land grabs or land acquisitions, were not there. We also had, let's say, legislation to deal with that, and this was important. But also things played out differently. Maybe China also decided to follow, you know, the model of the big ABCD. They do more origination. For example, in soybeans today, they have also made important acquisition in terms of distribution, logistics, storage, seeds, huge international acquisitions. So they actually are dealing with this or their interest. And I think this is something that we should also be always very attentively looking at. But it's something that I don't, up to now, I'm not sure how to single out, again, looking at the facts and what we have seen up to now, right? Single out like China in respect, despite the fact that SOEs, also a final thing to point out is that actually they had a lot of comparative advantages, right? In terms of, you know, for example, the power sector, where they also have a huge grid, and their companies had also developed technologies, this ultra high voltage technology. So, I mean, there is a lot of market issues also playing out there, right? Besides the strategic interests.
Thank you. If there are any questions from people in the audience, if you could either put them in the chat function or the Q&A, I'd be very happy to ask the panelists. Just while people are thinking of any questions they may have, I guess you mentioned, I mean, Tatiana, you mentioned that you work at I think the BRICS bank in Shanghai. I mean, for both of you, you know, kind of China's set up, you know, the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank. I mean, it's obviously very active in BRICS, and also the Belt and Road Initiative. Though I don't think that it signed a memorandum with China. I think Argentina, I believe, just has. I mean, do you think of these things as being opportunities for Brazil, and particularly the Belt and Road? I mean, maybe Vinicius or I mean, either can kind of give your views on this. Maybe if we start with Vinicius and then Tatiana.
Thanks, Kerry. Yeah, that's a very interesting question indeed. And many people always ask why Brazil doesn't sign a memorandum with the initiative. Well, I think there is, and we discussed that in the policy paper, there is one diplomatic tradition in Brazil of not signing agreements or memorandum that the country is not part of the production of that text, let's put in these terms. So it's more like a contract that Brazil is not participating effectively in the elaboration of the terms of this contract. So consistently with the tradition of Brazilian diplomacy and the history of Brazilian foreign relations, we normally don't do that. And the other point is Brazil is not seeing a reason to join the initiative, considering that the trade relations, the investment is already there, present, doing well. It's a fantastic partner for Brazil, economically speaking. So it's not a sort of need in the country to join the initiative. We don't see, or the country doesn't see as something that would change the picture so positively or better for the country in particular. No? That's one important point here. You mentioned the question of Argentina joining and signing the initiative as well. This is quite new also. It happened a few weeks ago. We still had time to include this detail in the policy paper before the publication, what was very good. And thanks for your team to be so patient with us in the last minute adjustments for the policy paper. But that's also an interesting aspect here, because Argentina also, this discussion that Argentina could join the BRICS, and then would be an interesting character, because if we look at the BRICS country, I think only South Africa has signed the Belt and Road Initiative, not Russia, India, or Brazil, that are among those bigs here as well. So having Argentina join BRICS as well, there will be a second one in the group that will be a part of the Belt and Road Initiative, and then can, again, put some pressure in the other members of the group, the BRICS group. But in any case, I don't think that for Brazil, this is something relevant at this point in the relations with China, and especially regarding trade and investments. I don't know if Tatiana would like to add something to that, but that's what we are trying to discuss in the paper as well.
Yes, I think you alluded to, Vinicius, if we look to with the recent signing of Argentina, actually, if you look to Latin America, now we have 20, right? 20 countries in the region that have signed the initiative. So it's about 2/3. But we have also big countries, for example, like Colombia, Mexico, that are not there. Brazil is not there yet. Like you said, Brazil maybe looks at its very framework that, the framework that has been built, the bilateral framework. And the Belt and Road Initiative, actually, it's a very, let's say, new concept, right? A new animal, a new concept, right? Sort of where you would enter bilaterally, but in a way you have, a multilateral cooperation, but where countries have to enter into bilaterally. But the future of the initiative is very always, right, China bound, I would say. At least that's what we have seen up to now. I don't know about the future. I mean, there could always be, just like it happened in Argentina, new considerations about interest. It's also, we must admit that the Belt and Road Initiative seems to be very broad and accommodating in terms of what would mean to, join. I think this is something also to be discussed. What does it mean if there is something that could be of the interest of, Brazil, and that this would also amount to something that, and then we could think of many things, some of the traditional also investment areas, or not only investments, or you could think of, new drivers, who knows, right? We will see in the future, but I think Argentina just is, as it was clear with the signing of the IMF agreement, and then followed by the announcement of joining BRI. You have to play with both sides and use the opportunities that the world could offer to you.
I just would like to return to this topic, Carrie, because there is another important aspect. I think Tatiana mentioned this multilateral and bilateral aspect that the Road and Belt Initiative has, and how that impacts also the multilateral relations of Brazil. So if we look at Mercosur, until Argentina joined, we had only Paraguay that in 2018 signed the Belt and Road Initiative. But now we have Argentina as well. So basically half of Uruguay, not Paraguay. So we have half of the Mercosur that have signed and half that haven't. So this is also will impact the Mercosur aspect and the Brazilian multilateral relations with important economic partners in the region as the Mercosur countries. And we need to see how this will impact the relationship inside Mercosur, what's not so clear. Exactly, also because in this moment, Mercosur is being under such a pressure, politically speaking. So just would like to add this other point as well.
Great, thank you. So, I mean, the other kind of important relationship in this is obviously with the United States. Now, I mean, we've had a taste of the United States kind of asking for more allegiance from, kind of its partners, and the way in which it figures China is obviously a huge problem. The Biden administration has not changed much from the Trump one in seeing China as its greatest threat. The FBI runs a, kind of specific website on the China threat, where it says that China is the greatest threat to the United States in terms of intellectual property and, kind of unfair trade practices. I mean, how does Brazil balance this relationship, which is very important to it, with the one with China? I mean, how, particularly under the current president, who's obviously, been sort of fairly close to, well, at least Trump. I mean, do you think that this is going to cause a division one day, or is it sustainable? What would be your views on that? Maybe Tatiana, first of all, and then Vinicius.
Tatiana, would you like to go first?
Yeah, it's so no, that's interesting. We the United States, it's a very crucial, important partner for Brazil, and there is no reason this could really change for our historic and economic relations, people to people, and whatever you want to explore. It's a very crucial partner, but we also have to. But the Chinese relationship really has grown in sort of very rapid, right? All happened in sort of 10 or 15 years, penetrating in different strategic sectors, very complementary, and as it is in many ways. I refer to it as dividing, the world, in the sense that, if you look, for example, in terms of new technologies, especially digital technologies, China and the US, are the ones that really, are leading in some of the niches. So I think, as going back to what we started discussing before, I don't think Brazil could, give up or be obliged to choose between those partners in terms of its developing and in terms of using its international relations to expand its domestic possibilities. Now, I admit that this will be more difficult because up to recent years, China growth in Latin America was sort of in a way overlooked, or up to the different national strategic and defense strategies from the US. This was not so clear, but now it is very clear, right? The strategic competition and rivalry. And then, but one thing to I think we have been pragmatic. We have to also to remember that even because President Bolsonaro had been actually very resistant and criticized, and there is a lot of doubt about, for example, if Huawei would take part in the 5G bid in Brazil. And I remember even during his visit to China, this was a very hot topic. But in the end, we were pragmatic, and so there was a specific rule in the bid whereby then Huawei could not take part in the government part of 5G, and then so this was one arrangement. So I think that even there, in a very sort of charged political environment, sometimes this was possible. So I think this is also part what we have to, when we say that we need, a strategy, this should be also part of that. And it will be increasingly more difficult, and that's why we need to be also very clear, but and also take our main objectives, actually as our guide, in terms of development.
Vinicius.
Yeah, I just would like to add to that as Tatiana said, Brazil needs to be pragmatic in these terms. And if it wants to really build up a strategy, it needs to be conscious of the numbers and the weight of this relationship with China. In 2001, China was, I think, the 6th country for exports to Brazil. And today is the 1st. Today, what Brazil exports to US, that's our 2nd destination, it corresponds to 1/3 of what is to China. So it's obviously China a very important partner to Brazil. And even if diplomatically, for political reasons, Brazil don't want to be so close to China, let's put in political terms, pragmatically speaking, that's not possible. So to think about that strategically, we need to look at these details and understand that, well, Brazilian government can make statements or position itself in relation to US and to China, but must be doing that pragmatically and assuring that it has its own position. And I think it's a point that we constantly discuss in Brazil Institute is, in Brazil, it's difficult to talk about grand strategy. People are a little bit afraid of talking about that, but it shows this relationship with China, this relationship with US. It shows that the country needs to carefully look in long term what wants to achieve, and looking what we have already achieved at this point that will help to drive if we want transformations or really take some positions globally speaking. So that's, I think, an important point to be made as well.
Thank you. We've got a couple of questions. One of them from Rodrigo Mora, who's a PhD student at the University of Essex researching Chinese geoeconomics in Latin America. His question is, the growth of Brazilian soybean and beef exports to China has coincided with an uptick in deforestation in the Brazilian Amazon. How does Brazil balance the economic advantage of trade with environmental concerns? Who would like to? Maybe Tatiana first of all, and then Vinicius. Yeah, Tatiana. Yeah.
Thank you, Kerry. So, this is deforestation is an issue that also I think very important and crucial for Brazil's present and future. It, as we've seen, it has increased somewhat in recent years, but most of the exports to China or exports of Brazilian food products, they are not necessarily linked to deforestation, right? A lot of it just happens very very far from the Amazon. It doesn't mean that. I think the most I think the risk there is even more for also beef and the expansion, right, of livestock frontier. I mean, it is an issue we have to deal with, both for soybeans and the expansion of livestock frontier. We have seen very swift reaction, especially from the private sector, the big exporters. In the past, since we adopted the soy moratorium, meaning most of the Brazilian exporters of soybeans, they don't buy grains from areas that have been deforested, right? So this is number one, and this has encompassed most of the exports. Because most of of course the livestock and the production and the raising cattle is something more difficult sometimes to control, but I think there has been a very strong answer from the most of the modern producers that really lead and have led this massive transformation of Brazilian agriculture. If you remember that in the 80s, Brazil was a food importer, and today Brazil is an agriculture powerhouse. It has to do with very high degrees of productivity, including in soybeans. It has to do with a lot of investment also in technology, right? So I think it's in the interest of Brazil that we do not, sell any product from deforestation. And actually on that, I remember there is an interesting commitment also from COFCO that was, I don't know if it was announced last year or the year before, right? COFCO, the big importer of food, government's cooperation for, import of food. They have announced that they, from 2023, they would have 100% actually rastreability, traceability for their soy imports from Brazil. I think this is something to be followed. And then, of course, we need to have the other way, right? The support, the domestic support from policies and supervision in place. And then together, government and private sector, it's in the interest of also the country and the society that, but I wouldn't, let's say, to be very clear, I wouldn't associate necessarily China to that. And I hope actually, and this is part of our paper, I hope that actually China and Brazil could be bolder in establishing, very clear sustainability objectives in the bilateral agenda to help combat, this problem.
Maybe Vinicius, if you have any views on this.
Just one single detail is, I think many people, when we discuss and we say that in the policy paper, the question, the need of value added to products that come from Brazil to China, I think this is a quite important value added to establish that those products, they are actually not provoking more deforestation, but indeed following patterns and parameters of conservation. So that will make Brazil not only a producer in quantity, but also in quality of those soybeans, for instance. So I just would like to make this point that probably that's the value added that can be put in soybeans, for instance.
Also on beef, maybe, Vinicius, if I could complement, I think because it's very interesting for our, audience, is that, Brazil has some, Embrapa, the same company that has led technological innovation in agriculture, has developed many, what we call protocols. For example, we have the carbon-free beef, right? This is a reality. You can do that in Brazil today. So this is something actually that could be another source of cooperation also and of interest for Brazil and China to develop this sort of sustainability linked products.
Great, thank you very much. And so just another question from Marina. So do you think that the creation of long-term agreements between China and Brazil, as suggested by Tatiana, could help with the identification and mitigation of human rights violations within the supply chain of raw materials exported from Brazil to China? As it refers to you, Tatiana, maybe I can give that to you first of all to kind of have a go. It's a complicated question.
I'm not sure exactly. Yeah, I'm not sure what are the violations that are being, but I guess, the best way to deal with that probably it's not, trade agreements. I think, any of those, I think, violations, I think we do have important domestic, that we have domestic legislation and framework, to deal with that. And this is part of, I think, developmental challenges. I don't know if I really, my suggestion in terms of the long-term agreements would be to really set up, long-term trust in terms, especially in terms of food security. Why? Because this is so crucial, right? This is so crucial for the world. It's so crucial for China. No wonder it has been also included in the last 14th year plan. It's always one of the main topics for the government report every year. And China has, increasingly alluded to the importance of self-sufficiency, even though there are market. We know, for example, it will be very difficult for China to be self-sufficient in soybeans. As much as, China was, actually the place and the world exporter of soybeans in the 19th century. That's, but, this is a long time ago. Now China has to import over 80% of its soybeans. And I don't think this, this will change, especially for soybeans, which is something that they sort of gave up the self-sufficiency a long time ago. But maybe they will also resist to give up in other grains, and grains are very important. And they are, of course, like we also mentioned in the paper, China is itself an agriculture powerhouse. So our suggestion for long-term agreements is especially to deal with, the risks, and also to increasingly build trust on something that is so fundamental, right, for China. And so you have to also, your starting point has to be what we see and the importance that we see in the whole framework that we see that is in place and being reinforced in China. So how can we, even with that, we can be an even, more trustworthy partner, right, for the long term? So that, and going also on the way of doing more sustainable investments, not only sustainable in the future in terms of flows, but sustainable in the same of environmentally, right, sustainable. We think we could have sort of one very, strong understanding could be developed that would, that when we export 1 kilo of beef, we are exporting 15,000 liters of water. So also, so we, I think, and you are adding much more value, right? When you do export beef than when you export the soybeans that will actually feed cattle or or other animals in China. So how this is one way. Brazil, I think the beef and also meat exports is something important, because this is one, we said there is not many things very new in the trade agenda in the last 10 years. Wow, meat is something new, right? Already the second largest agriculture exporter, if we take it together, about 8% of our exports. This is something that adds value, for example, to soybean and corn also. And that if we can develop, and deepen our commitment to this sustainable way of producing that, this will benefit both Brazil and China.
Right. I mean, just before Vinicius maybe gives his view, I mean, there's another question about a growing interest in reducing meat consumption in order for climate conservation, namely prevention of deforestation to clear away for pasture. Do you think this threatens Brazil's economy with its meat exports, or do you think the benefits of Amazon conservation, soybean exports will outweigh this potential economic loss? So maybe Vinicius?
Thanks, Kerry. I think we have here a very important element, again, when we think about strategy and when we think about long-term agreements, even just related to trade or exports. What we are seeing is the world is facing quite a lot of challenges in environmental issues and climate change. We are conscious about that, or at least we want to be conscious about that. I think countries in general understood that a commitment to the sustainable development goals, for instance, are fundamental as well for assure the products that they are exporting are really not creating a long-term damage to the planet in general. So in my point of view, what we have again in this relationship, Brazil and China, and especially in this issue of cattle and meat and soybeans, is a good opportunity to think how can we in long term address these demands and try to mitigate the damage that this can cause for environmental in global terms. So I see here a great opportunity if the countries want to engage seriously, diplomatically, technologically, and also ideologically in some aspects, addressing this question. And again, as Tatiana said, there are many procedures and protocols in place already that are really trying to tackle and reduce the damage that a larger production, and especially soya or meat, can have for the environment. And we should reinforce that. Long-term agreements are that opportunity, are the opportunities that we can negotiate and make clear principles that will drive the practice of what we want as trade in the future. And that is only possible, again, if we take into consideration these commitments to sustainable development goals or international values regard to labor, to human rights, and etc. So I see as a good opportunity indeed, but it will depend on a large commitment of countries for that.
Thank you very much. So I think the paper itself, the link to it has been put in the chat function, so everyone can have a look at the paper and to go into more detail on the discussion that we've had today. But it's good for me to thank Vinicius and Tatiana for their writing of this paper. on important issues. So I'm really grateful for the work that you've done and in drawing, kind of sort of highlighting this really important relationship, but one that probably doesn't get as much attention as it deserves. The recording of this event will be online too at some point, but I wish my colleagues best for the Brazil week, the rest of the week. And I look forward to our next policy paper being launched in a few weeks' time. Thank you very much, everyone, and really grateful for an excellent discussion. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.
Thank you very much, Kerry. Thanks to your team too. Thanks, Vinicius. Bye.